Our guest for these podcasts is Jake White. We can promise that this is one of the most interesting and useful podcasts that we have recorded. Jake White achieved a degree of fame as the coach to the Springboks Rugby Union team that won the 2007 Rugby World Cup. Since then, he has coached at the highest level around the globe, in Japan, in Australia with the Brumbies, South Africa with the Sharks, Tonga and France, and now back in South Africa with the Bulls. He has worked with and managed a multiplicity of cultures, and he has a very down-to-earth understanding of mental toughness and its importance in the success of all his teams. He has useful insights into leadership that apply to all sectors, not just sport. He also has a deep interest in and a passion for the development of young people. Jake White adopts a big-picture position on individual development and its relationship with team and culture development that is both refreshing and insightful. There is a lot of learning being shared here.
So, Jake, welcome to Ireland. Well, it should really be John saying welcome to Ireland because I'm not from Ireland. So welcome to our podcasts, and I hope you've got some great pearls of wisdom to share with us.
So, yeah, I hope so too. I mean,
I'm sure you have.
I'm looking forward to sharing some of the things that I think when we talk about mental toughness, because obviously I've been lucky enough to be coaching now for about 40 odd years, and I've coached from schoolboy level right up to international level, which gives me a good understanding of what has made the best players what they are.
Fantastic. Well, we're particularly interested in one angle. We talk about skills and fitness and so on, but there's a very important component that's to do with mindset, the mental attitude of it.
Yes.
So how important is that in the scheme of things?
Well, I mean, I think if I look back, some of the best players in the world, that's the point of difference they have. It's just how mentally tough they are. And, people put that down to, or they question that about many things. Toughness being, resilience, or, toughness being, tough as in physically tough too. And it's not always like that. It's mentally tough about, some guys have a burning desire to achieve because of where they came from. Mm-hmm. That helps, I suppose, with their mental toughness. One thing that I have, I was just sitting here thinking when you were talking to me, is one thing I have noticed is that the mentally tough players heal much quicker from injury than other players too. So, I've looked over the years that when you've had an injury, say a 6-week injury, which is a hamstring injury, or you get an injury that some people would say, it's going to take 2 months for him to come back. I generally find the mentally tough kids and the ones that have that fighting desire to do well come back much quicker.
I can relate to that.
You do. You get those players. I mean, just worked with teams when there'd be those guys who kind of get a really rough return to play of X amount, and it's a target. It's like, I'll beat that. Don't you worry. You once the physio says, here's a sort of return to play target. Right.
Yeah, and that's been a common thread for me, is that whenever we've had, especially now we play during the whole year. I mean, it's not like rugby season anymore. We have a long pre-season and off-season. You basically play almost 11 months of the year. And so I've even noticed it more now. The ones that are really, really mentally tough, and the ones you can rely on to have a high pain threshold through different situations, are the ones that always come back quicker than the other guys, And it doesn't mean anything other than the fact that I think he mentally is so switched on to getting back on the field that I suppose his body recovers quicker too.
Yeah, I'm sure there's probably something about if there are things they should be doing to get back onto the field quickly, they're more likely to do it and maintaining discipline and recovery.
Correct.
So on.
And probably double up too, I mean, as I said, and I think it's got to do with pain threshold. If I think about a guy like Skalkberger, for argument's sake, I mean, a lot of people talk about him, but I mean, you look at his life, he had meningitis, nearly died, came back from a horrific neck injury. That I really believe that it wasn't just because he was a good rugby player. It was because he's mentally quite a tough kid, and he would have therefore obviously had such a powerful mind that he would have almost convinced himself he could come back, And as I said, that was no fluke. I mean, you look at all the times, even the time when he got injured. As I said, I mean, one story I can share with you, we broke his neck, and we flew back in an aeroplane from Port Elizabeth to Cape Town, and he sat with his head against the back of my seat, just happened to be behind me. And I said, "Oh, you're right." He said, "My neck's very sore." And when we landed, he went to the doctor,
Right.
and he had broken his neck.
Right.
I mean, just shows you, again, just that for me just showed, just how tough he actually is. But then, as I said, recovered, came back, made a comeback, and then, then became better and better as he got older as well.
Well, that's good news. 'Cause I can share something. In 2005, I was diagnosed with bowel cancer, stage 3 bowel cancer. This was on December the 5th.
Yes.
I was operated about 3 days later, and I was told I'd be able to consider going back to work around Easter the following year. I actually went back to work on January the 2nd. That was literally, I just asked, right, what exercises should I be doing? What should I be eating? What should I be doing? And just followed everything religiously. If this was going to get me my best chance of getting back on my 2 feet,
Yes. Yeah.
that's it.
And you described there, Jake, this sort of, I suppose it aligns to what we call challenge. Like when you've got uncertainty, you see some people have that just more positive relationship with stress. You almost kind of, the more uncertain, the more pressure is, you see some guys kind of grow in there. And then equally sort of on the opposite end of the spectrum, you see some people kind of disappear a little bit. You must have some experience of guys you've worked with over the years.
I mean, it's interesting because I think everything is interlinked, So some people would say that if you've had a really tough life, therefore you have more fighting spirit. I've seen kids who've had really good lives. They're also very, 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 determined, very tough, very, very driven. So I don't think it's one or the other, but I have seen many times where in my coaching time, I think sometimes even players that handle pressure are ones that are, and that come through with those challenges are ones that don't really care. And they maybe don't understand the situation either. So when I say care, I'm not meaning as in they have no feeling, but they're so in that moment that they don't understand what's happening, and they just happen. Exactly. They don't. I suppose like a little kid that doesn't understand what can go wrong, And I've seen a lot of that. I've seen a lot of guys that in sport where, we always have a thing, even as a coach, we often speak about if there's a kick to win, the one person you want to have to kick it is the one who says, "Give me the ball." And I mean, that's a skill too. And you only see that when it happens. And maybe the one who says, "Give me the ball," is the one who doesn't understand what's happening in and around him, and he's happy to take that pressure. So I don't think it's always the mentally tough guy or the guy who grew up with a tough home life, or someone that. But then there are those too. There are those ones too that are so determined. I've read and spoken to many sports people that some of the driving forces they've had is, but they've been told by certain coaches they're never going to make it. Now, in some ways, that it's a blessing that they were told that by coaches, because that makes them get up every morning, makes them become who they are. And almost I suppose the driving force behind them wanting to achieve is to prove people wrong. Now, I'm not a fan of that, because I don't believe you should always get up trying to prove people wrong. You should rather try and prove yourself right. And there's a massive difference.
But it triggers something off in the individual. I listened to a podcast by Mario Andretti, who is the American Formula One champion. I listened to it last night, and his motivation was being told twice he would never make it. And yet he became the first American to be a fighter. I've forgotten what the American.
The Indy 500.
Indy 500 and the Formula One champion.
And then came back after he had leg amputation. Was it 1 or 2 leg amputations? And still learned to drive a car afterwards. But there's being a kind of boring academic type, I always like to give a sort of a counter to stuff. And I think you're dead right, Jake. It's not about, because of course the ones who were told they'll never make it and found that really challenging because they were a bit more sensitive to it. they don't get to write books.
No, exactly.
So we never hear from them, and there could be way more of them than there are those who kind of say, well, I'll show you and stuff. But on that point, I'm interested in your experience of how developable is that toughness. How much there's no doubt it changes over, as we kind of have more experience and more age and stuff. How much do you feel you can influence that?
Well, I don't know if one person can influence it, but I will say that the club can influence it, the environment you're in.
Mm-hmm.
So I'll give you an example. I've had a long thought about this for a long time. Is average players become really good in good environments.
Yeah.
And I think everyone understands why. It's because the greater God is that the club is so strong and so powerful and so important to everybody that even if you are a little bit fragile in any area, whether it's mentally, whether it's your work ethic, whether it's your attitude. I mean, I can't believe that every sporting club that is an icon of a club has never had difficult people in it.
Yeah.
And I think what I've found is that you can make someone mentally tougher, or you can make them better, or you can, by the environment and the people that he mixes with. Because even if you are a little bit fragile in that area, I think everyone makes you feel so much better. And that's part of what coaches want to do. They want to create environments where, everyone talks about recruitment and getting the right player and the right person, and those are all catchphrases or cliches that clubs use. We get the right human being, and we when we recruit, we look what kind of person he is, and that's all, as I said, it's all important. But I think also the club, if it is a really powerful club, also just has that ability to, you will then get a guy getting out of his comfort zone because he knows that the club it needs him then to step up.
Yeah, that's it. It's kind of that environment where I always try and find this. You watch training, and I always be saying to players there that you should be making mistakes in training, right? Because you should be trying to do something at a level that you're not currently capable of doing. That's how you improve, and that's the whole point, and that's why we train and stuff. But I wonder if you any kind of specific examples of just things you've seen within the environments where you think, it's that kind of thing, that's the symptom of a really supportive environment that's going to help somebody.
Yeah, I'll tell you, there's two questions you've asked me there, or two things you've made me think about, is that training is about making mistakes, but the perfect trainings are the ones that you don't make mistakes.
Yeah.
The ability at training is to stress the player in an environment that is much tougher than the game.
Yeah.
So if you use a cricket analogy, you throw at one stump when you know you have to throw 3 stumps in cricket, or in a rugby analogy, if you have to stop a maul and you stop 4 players with 2 players, then the ability of stopping 5 or 6 with 5 players is obviously easier.
Yeah.
So I would think that that's one area, when the training, the way you simulate training and the way you want them to make mistakes, but you're also trying to get to the perfect performance at training as well.
That's the standard.
And then the other thing, as you say, the player, I've seen it many times as well, where you put a player in an environment with better players, and the players drive it, is also important. Because they almost the custodians of the standards as well. If a coach tries to do it. So I'll give you an example, is if your counterparts and your teammates say you need to toughen up, it means a lot more than if a coach says it to you. And you need those role models to be able to say that in an environment that isn't making the player feel like he's inadequate. So that's why, again, I go back to the club, the environment, the training sessions of how they run, who manages them, how they're driven, how the seniors are part of it as well. Because if it's just one way where you give information, player does it, I don't think the player gets better and let's be fair as well. I mean, we're jumping around about mental toughness, but the mental tough players are also gifted.
Yeah.
I mean, there's not many mentally tough guys that have got no skill, or no ability. And that's what I suppose you want to try and do, is you want to try and get those two closer together all the time as well.
Yeah. And I wonder, on the kind of player-driven standards and things like that, I've seen different kind of ways of trying to, do you establish a formal leadership group within the players? And if so, is that a small group? Is it made up of, are you selecting them based on position on the field, or are you selecting them based on the kind of mental attributes that they bring, or different ages, or whatever? What's your kind of...
Well, I think it's everything. It's everything, like you've just said. And I mean, you've also got a lot of time to listen to me, but I coached in Japan, I coached in France, I coached in Australia at the Brumbies, which is a massive club. I coached at the Bulls now, which has always historically been one of the top clubs in rugby, and very Afrikaans. And again, just the way we are, very Afrikaans club, and we, that's... So if you go and you look at all the teams I've coached, and you have a Japanese club, and then and they're all graduates, they're all 23-year-old graduates that come out of university. And then you get Australian model, where the Brumbies, for argument's sake, were generally guys who, and I'm talking not in my time, but the club was started from all the renegades who weren't good enough to make Queensland and New South Wales. So there was something that made them tick as a group in Canberra. And then I was in Montpellier, which is a French club, which then had lots and lots of foreign players. And then, obviously, as I said, we used the the provincial teams that I've been coaching. So you've got to pick leaders. Sometimes you force it by putting a guy that might be uncomfortable in that position, and you put him in the group, because it'll going to get the best out of him. But again, remember, in Japan, you can't force the picking order either, because there's a in Japan there's a hierarchy as well, and you can't really. And it was quite surprising, because when I was there, I made a first year the captain, and that was unheard of. That was unheard of. And that guy went on to captain Japan. A guy called Suzuki Himeno, and so that was unheard of. When I made a first year rookie, I mean, they called him a rookie. You called a rookie as the captain of the club. It was something. It was like, but I really thought that he was the guy needed, because I could see he was going to play. They hadn't had a Japanese player for a long time, and I knew he was good enough to play for Japan. And so it worked me making him the captain, because he ended up playing for Japan and captaining Japan. I think he still is now in the squad. And you can imagine what that meant to the club when the leader then became an international player. So that was, but as I said, that was something out of the box that I thought I needed to do in Japan. In France, the leadership group, if you only make it the foreigners, you have a problem as well.
Yeah.
So you've got to be very careful that your leadership group, even though you understand them and they understand you, it was a bit difficult to make. So I probably didn't go big on leadership groups there either, because that would have counted against me.
Yeah.
Canberra, I mean, that was probably the nicest time to put leaders together, because of the fact that, as I said, they were renegades historically. And when I got there, they were 13th or 14th on the log, and we started from scratch. So I got a captain that came from New South Wales and Queensland before that, and got about, I would say, 10 players in our squad that were very young, and then made this chap was a bit older, the captain, and put him in charge of the juniors, which was another way of creating a bit of a leadership role. And that was different. And then in Pretoria, it's very different. Kids grow up differently. We'll talk about that as well. I mean, kids grow up differently in South Africa. They're probably a little bit more sensitive because of the way they grow up. I mean, I know there's this big talk about South Africans are tough, and yes, physically they're built for rugby. But we grow up differently, John, because, I'm not sure that too many countries would go with their 12-year-old son to the shopping center and go to the bathroom with their son. And that's the kind of thing that will happen normally in our country. You wouldn't leave your son to go to a shopping centre, even if you were there, and then let him walk to the bathroom. You'd go with him and bring him back. And it's just the way these kids have grown up. Now, to expect them then to be mentally tough when basically their parents are with them 24/7. And it just is like that. If I was, again, go back to Japan, I would see little girls like this catching the train on their own, up and down, going to music lessons with their music instruments. I mean, rightly or wrongly, but I don't think South African parents would leave their kids alone without someone being with them at their side all the time. Now, again, that means the leadership's different, means the mental toughness of that group's a bit different. It means... And I suppose I'm jumping around, and let's not forget, today's modern times, social media's come in, and so that's a completely different thing that's changed, I suppose, the toughness or the mental awareness of players as well, I mean, I never heard of cyberbullying and all that sort of thing in our time, And that can happen now without you even knowing it.
Yeah, it doesn't, it's there, it's a constant, can kind of get you any time and stuff. But I
mean, I know that, but I mean, players now will look at social media to see what they think of their performances, or they will.
I know.
And if there is something that says they weren't good, they'll take that. I mean, no matter how mentally tough you are, if you get that every week, or how mentally tough you think you are, that also is an added chip, that or a sort of dig that you have to get out of, because we never had that in the.
It's made me think about coaching in a new way, actually.
Okay.
You've got a very big picture view of coaching. People will often think about the coach as somebody who actually does something with each individual person.
Yeah.
You're talking about a kind of vicarious coaching, creating groups that coach other people.
Yeah.
And that must be a lesson for business, because that doesn't happen in business. Leaders get coaches, other people get coaches, but there's none of this sort of, very little of this top-down stuff. But you're talking about using coaching to create a culture.
Yeah.
And I think that's fantastic. How do you develop your leadership groups or the key individuals to be these sort of almost hands-on coaches? How do you do that?
It's gut feeling, to be honest. It's experience as well. You just know, you just have a gut feeling about which people you think you need to put in those places. As John says, you can't make it too big either, otherwise it looks like it's just another group. So it's got to be a little bit special to be in that leadership group. It's got to be people that have influence in the group as well, in their different ways. Now imagine in South Africa, if you think about it, we've got coloured kids, Afrikaans kids, English kids, black kids. Now if you only make it one group, then you lose the other, you lose the other groups. So you need to be also very aware of the fact that what motivates a Xhosa kid from the Eastern Cape is very different to what motivates an Afrikaans kid from the the northern parts of South Africa. And then if you have a coloured kid from the Western Cape, for argument's sake, what makes him tick and what makes him want to work harder is also not maybe the same message you would give to the other two groups. So therefore you have to be really very aware of how you're going to be able to cover all the bases.
I think the key thing here is about this awareness that the coach has. The coach is kind of pulling strings, to achieve an end.
And also, we're going to get about, but the management team you put around you too. And you talk about business now, Doug. It's quite interesting. What's happened in rugby, which I think is going to happen more and more in every other aspect, is rugby used to be, and as I said, I started coaching in 1982. And in 1982, when a coach coached, he basically had a bag of balls and a whistle, and he knew everything. Think about it. He knew everything. He knew how to kick for poles, how to throw in the line out, how to scrum, how to tackle, But now in the modern day coaching, if you have a debate with a player about kicking for poles, he'll tell you, I've watched Johnny Wilkinson on video, and if you say we're going to do breakdown, he says, I've seen Richie McCaw in a video. So coaching has changed significantly now, because you don't have to maybe be, a master of everything. But you have to know everything. You have to have a feel for, and then you need your management team that will then have to drive those things as well. And so if you look at business, what I'm saying is you've got a throwing coach, a kicking coach, a breakdown coach, a skills coach, a S&C coach, you know. And you're right. In business, I suppose what needs to happen is you need to make these little pockets where if everyone's improving, it's a little bit like, I suppose, like that Kaizen theory you have in Japan about continuous improvement. And again, I was lucky enough, worked at Toyota, so I got to experience firsthand about innovation and understanding about, you know, how to improve with that Kaizen, you know, theory. And it's exactly that. The smaller you can make things, and the smaller things can be improving, then all those 1%ers end up on the overall, you know. And that goes for everything, you know, whether it's skill, whether it's mental, whether it's preparation, whether it's any of those things. If you can improve the little things, then the sum of all those little things is the difference between making it and not making it.